Hi, I'm Sam Edith.
And I'm Amy Nelson. Welcome to What's Her Story with Sam and Amy.
This is a show about the world's most remarkable women, their professional and personal journeys.
Together, we'll hear from gold medalists, best-selling authors, and leaders of the world's most iconic brands.
Listen every Thursday or join the conversation anytime on Instagram at What's Her Story Podcast.
Bobbi Rebell is an author and host of the Financial Grownup podcast. Her newest book is Launching Financial Grownups. Live your richest life by helping your almost adult kids become everyday money smart. She was previously the Global Business News television anchor and personal finance columnist at Thomson Reuters. So Bobbi, why did you write this book?
I wrote this book because I knew so much on paper and yet was failing fabulously with my almost adult children. And I was so almost embarrassed and baffled at the situation because I had like 2 decades of covering, investor news and writing about personal finance. I had become a certified financial planner a few years earlier, and yet my kids just wouldn't listen. And I realized that there's a lot of advice for parents of younger children they might not always listen, in that they might throw a temper tantrum and just ignore you, but they're not going to just kind of, yes, you say, I got it, mom, and like walk out the door with their friends. It's a different level. And the stakes actually are much higher. You're not just teaching them lessons, sort of just as a lesson. This is actually happening to them, and there are benefits and consequences. So I needed help, and I kind of looked for help and there wasn't. So I went to my expert friends and there was a book.
And I just finished your book and loved it. As the mother of 2 teenagers and a tween, I'm going to recommend this to everyone because I think it's something that we don't think about enough. And I think it relates so much to whatever environment you're in, what your peers are doing. If you see other people buying their kids a car, you just think, oh, I need at some point to buy my kid a car, without even thinking, is that the right decision? Is that something they should be paying for? There were so many parts of your book where I had questions for you, and then I would turn the page and you'd answered it in a different chapter. So it was really, and I don't normally say that, but it was really something that is just so invaluable. I know I'll return to it again and again. One thing that struck me was that your father was a big influence on you becoming financially independent at a young age. Can you talk about what led you to buy your first apartment at age 23? I mean, that's incredibly unusual.
It is incredibly unusual, and you're right, my father had a huge role, and it's been very interesting watching his reaction to this book, because he's sort of looking back and saying, "Oh, I forgot I did sit you guys all down and just had to tell me what you needed for the semester." And in that case, he was very generous. He wrote a check, but then that was it. And he said, "Well, I thought that, well, if you ran out of money, you would just get a job." And we did have jobs in college. So, oh no, now I forgot your original reference about my dad.
No, it was
Um,
how did you become financially independent enough to buy your,
Oh,
first.
the apartment. So that was heavily dependent on my dad. That's why I brought him up. So after school, I went to Penn. A lot of my friends had these big fancy jobs, and I was just, going to my journalism job. And I was living at home, and we were looking at rental prices in this area called Lincoln Towers on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And the rental prices were like $1,000 a month for a ground floor back of the building studio. So we did the math on that, and we realized that because it was a time when it was the early 90s, real estate was actually in a real slump in New York City, that if I had the down payment to buy basically that same studio, and they were going for about $100,000. So we did the math on, what a loan would be and all the costs associated with it, and we realized that I could buy one, and the total payments on that would be less than rent. And so I, was able to get the down payment through having had savings. And then I did save by living at home for some time, which is something my stepdaughter did. And then, you do often need parents co-signing for you at that age. So again, I had that parental support, which is definitely privilege and definitely not something everyone has. But I was able to buy a co-op in that complex. It's called Lincoln Towers on the Upper West Side, in that market slump. But I will tell you, no one else was buying real estate in general at that time. So I bought at a time when people were afraid to buy New York City real estate. And that was very risky in that sense. But we did the math, and we felt that the amount of money I would save in even 2 or 3 years, not paying rent, but paying this, partially tax deductible maintenance and mortgage, the math just worked. And so I did it. And then one of my best friends did it too. She bought the same apartment on a higher floor, and the market had even gone down by then, and she got a better price. And I'll never forget it. Never forget it. I'm like, you took my idea and you did it better. But I was happy for her. It was great. It was like having a roommate, but not, because we were in the same building, and we would share mac and cheese, which was like 99 cents. And we would share a box for dinner because we were then on very tight budgets because we were homeowners at a young age.
I love it. Well, one of the interesting things about your book is you really put it into context how both COVID and the age of helicopter parenting has changed our relationship with how we talk about money with our kids. How has that impacted it?
It's so interesting, and that's such a good question. First of all, it's changed our relationships in that when normally adult kids move home, it's often in a situation where they are in financial distress. There's something going on related to them as a person. This, they were moving home because something happening to everyone. So it was a shared experience. And there were other things happening. They didn't have activities to constantly run to. Weren't making plans to go see their friends in person. So they were around and sort of a little less attached to their friend group than they might have been. We also got to witness, and this is really interesting, we witnessed our adult children working at their jobs. And a lot of parents, I don't think, fully appreciated how hard their kids worked. And so that was a whole new appreciation of them as individuals, not just our children, and the way that other people see them and the way that other people might have expectations for them. It also helped create an environment where, after a certain point, I mean, remember when it was 15 days to stop the spread? Well,
Hmm.
okay, so you got 15 days, so your kid comes home, so maybe you're doing their laundry and making sure they have all their meals made for them. But as time went on past that 15 days, things start to settle in a little differently, and maybe mom is not making all of her meals for her 20-something children. Maybe they're starting to make them for their parents. Maybe they're starting to have different kinds of conversations with their parents about their adult money issues that are very different from just, oh, I'm short on cash, can I have some money? Maybe they're really talking more about the things going on in their life and their goals and dreams, and they're also seeing, just through general conversation, the financial realities of their parents, which may not be as perfect as they necessarily assumed. A lot of us assume our parents have things always perfect. And I learned over the last few years, even, that my parents had more ups and downs that I was aware of at all when I was growing up, that things were not always perfect. And they kept a lot of that from me at an age appropriate time. So it was not a mistake for them to not share it. But it was just interesting to learn that their career paths weren't necessarily perfect all the time.
What was your personal experience during the pandemic with your almost adult kids and talking about money?
It was a lot of that. I mean, we did have a lot of conversations that we never would have had because the oldest one, well, she had actually just graduated college and started her job. So she was very busy, and I got to witness how, as I said, how hard she was working. She worked for a consulting company. And I also was able to see my stepson he was a sophomore when he moved home. He's at NYU Tisch Film School. And so it was interesting to see him adjusting and to see how they related to their friends. And, you just talk to them more because they're there, and you didn't have distractions. They weren't going out to meet their friends at night. They were just home. And so I remember we went the first few months, we were in kind of upstate New York at a house, and we had dinner the first night there. I remember it was a Taco Tuesday, and we all sat down to dinner together at the same time on a weeknight, not a special occasion or a holiday. And my youngest, who's 14, commented. He says, "We've never had dinner together." And everybody liked it. And we did start to really have dinner together, where even if someone wasn't hungry or whatever, they came and sat at dinner time. And so many conversations happened then. And just getting to know each other in a way that wasn't as purposeful. It just happened sort of, I hate the word authentically, but it did. It happened authentically. And that was a great experience for our family. And I think that they came to respect us. They saw us as adults, not just parents, which is
Mm.
also really healthy. They saw more of our lives because they're seeing it from a different perspective as young adults, not kids that are in high school getting ready to go to college. They weren't as only focused on themselves.
Were there any kind of financial stories about your ups and downs that you shared with them during this period of time that they didn't know?
Well, I think, yeah, yeah. Well, I always share them because I think it's really important. So I have to think, that's why I'm sort of struggling about the timing of when I share things. I certainly share the fact that you talked about the apartment. Well, after I got the apartment, I then wanted to do a Hamptons share, and I was so tight on money that I took out a loan, which is not good to do. And I have shared that publicly. It's in my previous book, but yeah, so don't do that. So they know that. So they know we do all, look, we are always making mistakes all throughout life. And it's really a question of being able to course correct and make different decisions. But we all make mistakes. And I think that they're more than aware of that. And they're also aware that we make choices. They saw it a lot when they came home that we were choosing, I mentioned we're going on an Alaska trip, and in a perfect world, I would go on one that costs X dollars, but we wanted to bring the whole family, and my stepdaughter's boyfriend's going to come. So it's 6 people. So you know what? We're not. We're going on sort of a larger cruise line, and we'll be, sort of a middle tier room, and it's going to be great. But I wanted to have the whole family with us. So that's a choice that we made, that we weren't going to do that. And, my stepdaughter asked, can we upgrade the drinks package? And I just was like, no, that's ridiculous. I'm like, if you and your boyfriend want to like pay up for your own drinks, go for it. But no, this is it. So I think that they know that there's not an endless pit of money.
Well, there's also a fine line, right? That I think parents try to straddle with. At what point do you share, and at what point do you withhold things from your kids? Because you do want your kids to have a childhood that's free of adult worries. They deserve that.
Hmm.
I have a friend growing up, their parent, shared with them so many financial concerns that it led them to have a really odd relationship with money as an adult. But then, of course, we know plenty of people who never even heard about money and how it was made and how it was spent until adulthood, and they experience it themselves. So, at what point? I mean, what is too much to share, and how do you figure that out?
Well, you look at, first of all, the child's personality, maturity, age, need. For example, in the book, I start at age 16 because they need to know things if they're going to start driving a car, if they're going to have a job. There's a need that they have to understand the basics of what's going to come out of their paycheck, and the responsibilities that go with having a job. So you focus on all of those things, but remember that you may unintentionally give them reason to worry. So if you think that they are sort of getting a sense of things, it's important to talk to them directly so they're not just getting it from overhearing things. Sometimes we aren't as discreet as we think we are. And I think that's the worst case scenario, is when you unintentionally are giving them information to be worried about. So if that's happening, you need to be more direct with them and let them in on things. But it is important to give them a general sense of, your values when it comes to money, more than a scarcity mindset. You want to avoid that. So you can talk to them about where you're prioritizing your resources, and maybe there are times when you're going to be a little bit more careful with money because you have a goal like saving for their college. So you can talk to them about those kinds of things. You don't have to assign dollar numbers to everything. For example, if you want to talk to them about what we call estate planning, which is a terrible name because it implies that you have to be uber wealthy. But the truth is, all that means is kind of where everything goes, when you pass. And, you don't have to, you can tell them the general ideas that you have without telling them dollar amounts. That said, a lot of information is available on the internet. So even if you have a little kid like Amy with a 7-year-old, if their friends got curious, they could all look up what everybody's houses cost and things. So they can
Mhm.
figure stuff out because of technology. They have a lot more information than we had when we were young. And so don't be naive and think that they don't know things. So control the information if you think that they're getting it.
How could you try to figure out if you think that they're getting it? I mean, is this something that we should be routinely talking with our kids about? Like, what are you
Yeah.
learning about this in other places? Like, we ask
Yeah.
about what are you learning from your friends about drinking, or what are you learning from your friends about other things?
Yes, you should definitely talk to them. And you should also, I think it's important to try to, especially if your kids are younger and you can be in the room, or you're carpooling and they're there, you can even put your headsets in, but don't have them on anything so you can sort of listen. But try to sort of be present enough in your room and your kid's life. I mean, you can't control it if your kid has a Finsta, whatever, but like you can follow them on social media. You can just talk to them and say, oh, what are you guys talking about these days? What are you doing? Whatever. just try to keep that casual conversation going. And so they'll come to you and talk to you about things. They often want to talk to you more than you think. I am always shocked when my 14-year-old comes home from school and tells me what everyone's talking about at school, which is interesting.
When I used to host a radio show, it was a call-in show, and people would call with their problems. And the second most common problem was a failure to launch discussion
Mhm.
of what do I do? My child won't leave the house in terms of, financial independence. They don't make enough money, and my spouse says we should kick them out. How do we handle this?
Every case is different, but in general, you need to sit down with the young adult and talk about your expectations, your hopes for them, and really come up with a plan. And one of the toughest things to do is tell them that their dream, they may be saying, well, I'm home because I'm working on this business or I'm working on my big project. You have to basically say, okay, but you need income too. So if you want to be here, I need to see an income producing job. I don't care if you don't like it. You need a job just to have a job for money. And unless you do, you're going to have to find another place to live by this time. And of course, it depends on the context. If they've been home a week, give them a break. But they have to have an exit strategy. And that is one of the themes that I talk about in the book. But along with expectations, you also have to let them know that you have confidence in them, that they can do it, and that you believe in them, and that you're there as a resource, not a financial resource, but as a resource to come up with ideas and to brainstorm. And let them figure out the details, but let them know that this is a very temporary situation and that they, set a timeline, work backwards. If they say they need more time, say, explain to me why and make a decision if you think that's valid. But you need to really set the bar high and let them know that they can do it. That's the biggest thing because there's usually more psychology than fact in why they're staying home. They're probably afraid to fail. They're afraid to disappoint you. They might have set a goal and said it publicly and they haven't made it yet, right? So they don't want
Mhm.
to disappoint anyone. It's okay to be doing a job while you're following your dream.
I
And that's
love
something we're going through with my stepson.
I love that. And I think that so much of your book, what I enjoy about it is that it's not just like here are the facts, here's how to set up a Roth IRA. It's infused with emotion, which I think is such a big part of our relationship with money.
Yeah, because that was the hard part. It is more psychology than fact. I do have the factual information in there, but I had that and I was failing. And that's because I wasn't communicating well. It's important to really think about, for example, the tone in which you speak to your children and make sure it's a supportive tone, not a judgmental tone, that you're accepting them, that you're hearing what they are saying. One of the people interviewed in my book, and I believe you've interviewed her on this podcast, is Tori Dunlop. And she is well known, I would say millennial, right? She's millennial or Gen Z.
I think she's 27 or 28. She was one of the very first Riveter members.
Oh, she's amazing. And
Amazing. She's
she's
incredible.
interviewed in the book. And so she's right in this category. She's 25 years old. And we talked a lot about her relationship with her parents, especially her father. And the most important thing she really said, and I think she's spot on, is listen and hear what your child is saying. Because if you just yell at them to get out of the house by a certain date, they probably won't, by the way, and it's going to ruin your relationship and create tension. And what's the point of that, right? You're basically saying you're a failure, get out of my house. That's not what you want to do. You want to just listen to them. Tell me why you're here. What is this, season of your life doing to get you to where you want to be? How can I help you besides just indefinitely providing a place to sleep? I want to help you proactively. Maybe, and I say in the book, if you have connections, life is hard enough. Make the connection, make the introduction, make sure your child is going to follow up, make sure it's going to be well received, but do the things that you can do within your power reasonably to help them leave.
Did you talk to your kids before you wrote the book about the fact that you felt like you were failing on connecting with them on this front?
Yes. Yes.
And what did they
I mean,
say?
Ashley wrote the epilogue. Did you get to that, Sam?
Not yet, no.
Okay, so Ashley wrote the epilogue, and it's my favorite part of the book. And and I can be a helicopter parent, even though I was aware of it and didn't want to be it. I see it. I see it all the time. And she wrote this epilogue, which gives her perspective on what I wrote, and it gives her money tips and her justification of a lot of things that we fought about. And so it's really funny. So she defends her decision in the epilogue, which I talk about in the book, how she's living at home rent free. We're not charging her for anything except the phone bill, which is another thing. But we're basically, she's living free, and I am watching her savings build, and she's doing great. And the pandemic helped because she wasn't running to go out with her friends. There was a lot less temptation. And then all of a sudden, she's like, "Oh, my boyfriend and I are buying season passes to Disney World." Now we live in New York City. Disney World is in Orlando. There's a pandemic. Her number one priority is saving for this apartment that she's wanted since she was 13. Basically, since she met me and moved in and she heard my story, she's been saving for this apartment for, whatever, almost a decade. And I'm like, this is not aligned with what you've told me you want to do. And it's my job to help you. And, I'm also thinking, and I need you, I love you, but I want you to go out and be happy. And, because we had everybody home for the pandemic. And she just was adamant, and we fought about it. I was so angry, and she justified it. And I sort of went, well, I can't control it. She'll probably be home forever, and this is not going well. My book, I'm like, well, it'll work out if she buys the apartment. If she doesn't, that'll be just a reality check. Okay. And in the epilogue, I'm not going to go into the whole story.
And
Everyone
don't
read the
spoil
book,
the
the
epilogue,
epilogue.
please.
You will hear her perspective on how she justified buying season passes for Disney World while living in New York City in a pandemic, the Disney World in Orlando. She
Oh my
does
That's
it.
God.
so funny. So I'm
Okay. So
83%
you
of the
got to just
question.
let him do.
I'm
Oh, go ahead.
83% of the way through, but now you've ensured that I'm definitely reading the rest because I can't wait to read the epilogue.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. Like you can't I'm judging her. I was like, don't do that. Don't do that. Meanwhile, like I said, I did, get the Hamptons share with a home equity loan, which,
Right. The
is
Disney is
also
her
not
version
good.
of the Hamptons share.
What?
I said Disney is
My
her
Siri
version
on
of
my
the
watch is,
Hamptons.
yeah, it really is. But it actually, she could justify, there was really no justification for my Hamptons share financially. But I have mixed feelings because also you have to live your life. And I did pay the money back. I just didn't have cash on hand at the time. And that was the most efficient way to borrow money rather than somehow put it on a credit card. So it wasn't a terrible thing, but it still wasn't the most financial grown up thing to do. But Ashley has really grown into her own. And she has to choose her priorities. And that's the other thing. She's getting a puppy. Now she waited till she had sort of more money in her emergency fund. And she's been in the apartment for a year at this point. And so now she's literally getting a puppy in a few days. So she waited for it, and she's researched vets and she researched all the costs. Do I think she should get a puppy now? No, I think she should wait a couple more years. But I have full confidence I'm not paying for the puppy. She is off the payroll. She has her own apartment for a year now. I have never worried that she would not be able to make her mortgage payment. So I had my moments of worry, but by the way, she's very proud. Let me tell you, I get texts from her. She does screen grabs of her friends, and it's not so much jealousy as much as bafflement. They're like, "How did you do this?" And she just says, "I lived at home and really watched my money for 2 years." Right? If you save 100, like almost 100%, and when she did go out, she was mindful with her money. She was careful. So, and they're kind of living at home with their parents just indefinitely, and they don't feel good about themselves, and they don't see an exit strategy, and that makes me sad. The kids want to grow up.
What kind of financial grown-up advice would you give to college students considering graduate school? So this is something, I paid my way through law school, and I made a decision to go to the most expensive law school in America. And I had a half tuition scholarship, but I just had no sense about interest on the loans and, the cost of living in New York City, which is where I went to law school. And
Mhm.
and nobody talked to me about it,
Yeah.
right? And it's a decision that I made at 21 that impacted decades of my life. And so like what is a way that we can talk to our children about those kind of decisions?
You answered your own question. You need to actually talk about it and run the numbers and say, okay, if you are going to use the law degree and this is important to you, that's fine. But look at what it'll cost and really think about what kind of law you're going to practice because that's where it really falls apart. You have to look. I mean, I just opened a TikTok account. So everybody, please follow me. It's just my name. But I saw a TikTok and it was mortifying because it said the 5 jobs from that you get an undergraduate degree that are the worst jobs, the worst value. In other words, if you have student debt and you need to pay them off, these are the 5 worst jobs. And journalism, which is basically what I've done my whole life, was like top of the list of like jobs where you can kind of earn your money back. So that would be a bad move financially. It doesn't mean you don't do it, but you need to recognize. So if you're going to go into law, think, I don't know enough about which areas of law necessarily pay the most, but you should think about, if you're going to have a lot of law school debt, what is the plan to pay it off as quickly as possible? Think about what kind of law will pay really well. Where is the demand for lawyers right now for the highest paid law? You may not stay in it forever, but just go for it. Because the other thing is, people think their money is tight when they're in the lowest paying jobs in their earlier in their career, but actually, because you often have no dependents, you have the most discretionary money and it's the easiest to pay off those loans. So
Right.
really focusing down when you're young and just out can really help. That's something that's very relevant, unfortunately, in places like medical school, but also even undergrad. I mean, think about the career you're going into. My stepdaughter, Ashley, who's featured prominently in the book, she originally was accepted. She went to Indiana. She was accepted to their School of Education. She was going to be a teacher. She's so great with kids. And I think if everything in the world paid equally, she'd probably be doing that, but it doesn't. And that's something to talk to your kids about. It's not right, but it is. And she switched her career and she's basically a cybersecurity analyst. There's a better name for it. There's a fancy name for what she does, but she works for a consulting firm and she's doing so well. And she is being recruited for jobs that pay even more 2 years out of school, like a lot more, like more than I ever made in my career. She's going to make by 27, 28. I'm telling you, it's bananas. And she doesn't always love the work, but she loves the financial security and she takes so much pride in not needing our money. She's happy if
Mm-hmm.
we take her to dinner, don't get me wrong, but knowing that she makes a salary, that she's no issue making her expenses, and she can now go out with her friends because she's been in the apartment a year and she's sort of settled in, she has a good locked in interest rate and all that stuff. She's really proud, like she loves it that she earns money, even though the actual work may not be as fulfilling. Having a lot of money that you earned is very fulfilling to her.
What is your perspective on women and money? I mean, you have worked with, at this point, I would imagine thousands of people. And are there gender differences and why?
I think there are gender differences. I think a lot of women want it's a stereotype, unfortunately, for a reason. And I think you've seen this, and that's something that you've been such a wonderful advocate for, that women are many, I don't like to generalize, but women can sometimes fall into the trap of wanting someone to just take care of them and deal with that because they perceive that they're not good at money. But the truth is, money is not that hard. Don't spend more than you have. Make sure your money's invested and diversified. That's really kind of it, right? So I'm not a specialist in that, but I think that women have more need for money because we earn less and we live longer. And we often, in cases of divorce, and by the way, I'm divorced. I've seen my husband was divorced from his ex, obviously. And so I've seen how the money goes. And what women need to understand is that sometimes a marriage will end even not through divorce. Sometimes you could be widowed or all kinds of things can happen. Your husband could lose their job. Both men that I was married to have had career ups and downs, and you have to step in. I have twice had to be the breadwinner unexpectedly. Right now, he's the primary breadwinner, but I always make sure I'm earning money. He's been very supportive of it. He keeps saying he wants to be a kept man. So I think that you are always going to feel more confident and more secure if you have money that you control. And by the way, my first marriage that I just alluded to, had I not had both money and wonderful family support, I think it would have been much harder for me to leave. And it makes me very sad. And I am on the board of a charity that works to educate women that are victims of domestic violence on financial literacy, because without money, it is very hard to leave a bad situation. And that's the extreme version of it. But I'm very passionate about that problem and finding ways to get women to advocate for themselves when it comes to participating in family money decisions and not just stepping back. That was a lot. Sorry.
No, it's awesome.
That's
Really
good.
helpful. Yeah. Aim, do you want to ask the final question?
What is one piece of advice that you would give that isn't in the book?
Oh gosh, guys, I put it all in a book. I
It's
don't
a
know.
really thorough
I
book.
mean, it's a really thorough book.
I mean, I
Uh,
guess what
Okay,
what
let
have
me
you
ask a
learned in
different.
the
Let me ask
last
a different.
well, I
6
would say
months
I
since
could
you
give you
published
things.
the book, since you put the
Right.
book in?
I'll tell you some things that have happened since the book that are
Yeah.
just personal anecdotes that really show that even as far along as I have come, so I would say what's not in the book is that the journey really does continue, as much as that is the cliche, that I still catch myself doing helicopter and snowplow things. So just recently, for example, we noticed we're going on this trip to Alaska, but we have to go through Canada. And so we want to make sure our passports are up to date, which everyone should do anyway. So Bradley is 22 years old, and we noticed his passport was expired. So because we know that when you have children, you have to go to the passport office or the post office together to get it renewed. My husband and I went to the post office to get it renewed, and we were informed that he's an adult and he has to do it himself. We wanted to renew his passport. Are you getting the connection? Like, we don't perceive our child. Like,
As
it
an
didn't
adult.
occur to us to just like tell our 22-year-old to renew his passport. Now, when we did, he was like, okay. And he just like made an appointment and did it. Like, he's perfectly capable. And the other thing that happened that's not in the book is for the high holidays last year. So we're Jewish, we go to a synagogue, and the way that it works is you get tickets for the high holidays. And you write to them and you say how many, you need, and they allocate appropriately depending on, your membership. And so I said, well, we need 2 for my husband and I, and we need 3 for our children. And I get back a note that said, well, we're going to give you, 2 adult tickets for you and your husband. We'll give you have a 14-year-old, no problem. You can, or he was 13 at the time. And you can, and then there's a college student ticket, no problem. And they said, but Ashley needs her own membership. I was so offended. I was like, what do you mean? Oh my God. And I went to my husband. I'm like, they want her to have her own membership. And, I wrote back and I was like, what do you mean? And she said, she's 25. She needs her own membership. I'm like, but she's my child. And they're like, but she's an adult. And all this to say that it keeps happening. And, I'm trying. I'm right there with all of you, I guess is my advice that's not in the book, is that it doesn't magically go away. We always see these adults as our children, and they're fine. I mentioned to Ashley, and she was like, we ended up not going because Delta variant got crazy and we didn't want to be in person. But she was like, oh, maybe I'll look into my own membership. Like, it's not them, it's us. And so that's the advice I would give, is just kind of like check yourself, because we all have these moments where we just can't like process that even though there are children, like literally legally, they are adults. You legally cannot do certain things. You cannot renew your adult child's passport for them. Society is stopping us from doing that. So
That's hilarious.
yeah, I don't know. That's
Nice.
my take, but it's sadly it's so true. So I need to go back and read my own book and get a little reinforcement and a little strength. But it's hard. It's really hard to let go, and it's hard to understand that they are fine, that they'll figure it out. Even Bradley, he's graduating from NYU. He's got a film project. He came to us and said, I need a budget of this amount of money. And my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, we're trying to get better at this. And we were like, how are you going to raise that? We didn't say, here's a check. How are you going to raise that? We'll help you figure out how to raise it. So you have to kind of just check yourself. And he's raising it. He's doing great. He's doing a really good job.
Well, Bobbi, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you for reading the
Yeah.
book. I mean, it's exciting that hopefully it's helping a lot of people. As I said, I needed the help. And
The book is Launching Financial Grownups, and that was Bobbi Rebell. I know she has given me a lot to think about with my own kids, and Amy's already planning.
Thanks for listening to What's Her Story with Sam and Amy.
We would appreciate it if you leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, connect with us on social media at What's Her Story Podcast.
What's Her Story with Sam and Amy is powered by my company, The Riveter, at theriveter.co, and Sam's company, Park Place Payments, at parkplacepayments.com.
Thanks to our producer, Stacey Para, and our male perspective, Lou Burns.